In January 2023, we recorded the first episode of the Sam Oldham podcast. Since then, we've released 100 weekly conversations and accumulated over 65,000 downloads and 120,000 streams on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. I've had the opportunity to sit down with 48 incredible young men and women from the world of sport. Each and every episode has been available to watch on YouTube, and this year we plan to release documentaries sharing more incredible stories from some of the best athletes in the world. Together with my co-producer Sam Linley, we've created something that we're both very proud of, and this is the podcast story. So the podcast started in 2018 when I first met Sam again. I'd known Sam when he was younger, we were family friends. He came to the gym in Nottingham and he took some stills, he took some portraits. I really enjoyed it. We got along really well. The portraits that Sam created were incredible. And I asked him whether he was interested in doing some videography and documenting my journey. At that point in my career, I was 25. I still had plans to try and make it to another Olympic Games, and I was exploring YouTube, and I'd done that since I was a kid. So I think I first uploaded videos to YouTube when I was about 14 years old. So I had an older channel, I think it was just called Sam Oldham, and I used to every now and then make montages like a lot of the gymnasts did, and it was something that I really enjoyed doing. I loved that creative process. I loved telling a story through video and imagery. And when I met Sam, my end goal in my head was to potentially one day have some sort of a social media channel or YouTube channel or a platform that I could share my stories and hopefully share other athletes' stories too. I've always loved conversation. I've loved stories. I had some incredible storytellers when I was growing up. So my granddad was an amazing storyteller. My dad was unbelievable. The lengths my dad would go to. I remember one year he dressed up as Santa and actually got inside the chimney and recorded it on an old video recorder back in the 90s to try and convince me that Santa was real. And Sergey was just the most incredible storyteller. He was just able to inspire me by telling me these incredible stories of his childhood, growing up in Russia and training gymnastics. And yeah, it was incredibly inspiring to listen to his stories. And that certainly lit the fire and the spark within me to want to go on to be an Olympian myself. And when I met Sam and we spoke, we started documenting our journey on YouTube and we were vlogging, and it was really cool, and I loved the work that we created. It was beautiful. I think it was certainly something that was very different. There wasn't any other gymnast doing that, particularly gymnasts, but I don't think many athletes doing that kind of thing. It was very raw and honest and real. And obviously it was a time when I was struggling with injuries. Mentally, I wasn't in a great place. So we tried to document that and make it as true as we possibly could, as true to life. We didn't kind of sugarcoat anything, and I think people really resonated with that. And then I had the idea of doing a podcast, and this started when I first started listening to the Joe Rogan podcast, and I got into MMA, and essentially I went on this journey of studying podcasts. I don't know how many podcasts I've listened to now. I'm kind of 6, 7, 8 years down the line. Must be hundreds, if not thousands of podcasts that I've listened to, and I just love conversation. I love it so much. And I felt that I wanted to have a voice. I think for a long time in the sport of gymnastics, there'd been certain situations where I'd been told that my opinion was invalid and it wasn't valuable. And I didn't like that. I felt like I had a story to tell. And so creating the podcast, which we initially did on YouTube back in 2019, and what we did do was explore lots of different ideas. So we went to the local barbershop, Number One Barbers, that supported me throughout my career, and we did an episode in there. We did an episode with Andy where we were in Sam's front living room. We did episodes at the food club in Nottingham, where we recorded a couple of episodes there, and we did some podcasts in my old house that I shared with my brother and Andy, and we did about 5 episodes there, and I loved it. It just wasn't, I don't think at the time it was the right time. It wasn't sustainable, and also it was very difficult while I was still trying to train full time and struggling with injuries and mentally being in a place where I felt very lost, and I was depressed at that time, and I needed to figure things out for myself. But what it did do was give me some great learning lessons and some foundations that I could then build upon when the time was right. And the time that was right was after we went traveling, me and Connie, and I got back, and prior to going traveling, I've shared this story before. I had a conversation with Sam and said, Sam, look, would you still be interested? And Sam said, yeah, definitely. Let's chat when you get back. And we had a chat. at the very end of 2022, Christmas 2022, and then in January we got started, and we decided that we were going to record a couple of episodes first before we released to give us a bit of breathing space, and that was a great thing that we did, and that set the tone, and we still aim to do that today. And we got started, we recorded the first episode, and I think the biggest challenge for me in the beginning was going to be the consistency, and that's where I'd made a mistake in the past. Not necessarily made a mistake, but that's the area I'd struggled with. It was that consistency, and I think if you're going to have people that are following your journey, whether that's on YouTube, on social media, or maybe listening to a podcast, they need to trust that you're going to be consistent with when you're releasing that content, and it's got to be every week or every month or whatever you say. And I think one thing I've learned in life is certainly to under promise and over deliver, not over promise and under deliver. And I think in the past I tended to do that. I would over promise these exciting ideas that I had inside my head, but hadn't maybe thought them through or really thought about how can I actually pull this off in reality. Whereas this time with the podcast, we approached it. Certainly I approached it very professionally. I wanted to do a real good job of it. This time it was a real passion project, and I wanted to use all of that experience I gained from 2018 up until that moment when we decided to give it a good go and put that all into practice. And I think, credit to Sam. He encouraged me to do solo episodes in the beginning, and I think we did 21 episodes, solo episodes, where I shared my story, and that was very overwhelming in the beginning because I thought, who's going to listen to me talk for 45 minutes to an hour every week, and how am I going to have enough things to say? But actually, as the weeks went on and I pushed through that uncomfortable period of feeling like I was running out of ideas, I started to take ideas from the world around me, and that's something I still do today. If I have a conversation with somebody, or I watch something on TV, or I might read a news article, if there's something that gives me a bit of inspiration, I try and relate that to my own life, my own experiences, and share those stories on the podcast. And the solo episodes is something that, for me, has been a huge, huge benefit to my life. I think it's been something that was very, very positive and something I didn't know that I needed at that time. And I think what happened was it almost became like therapy for me. And that feeling of my voice not being heard, I think a lot of that is down to me doing a lot of overthinking and those ideas just staying and living inside of my head and not being projected out into the world. And now I feel like I can do that, and it's really good. It's been brilliant for me, my mental health, or my own personal journey. I think guests has been a bit of a challenge when we started. Initially I'd wanted to get guests straight away. I'm really, really glad that Sam convinced me to, kind of build up some credibility with the audience, also practice my skills of, again, public speaking and being able to do this for 30 minutes to an hour, because it's not an easy thing to do in just one take. But to practice that, it really gave me confidence when we did then bring in the guests. And the hard thing with guests is that, we've had 48 guests on the podcast, men, women, from the world of sport. For a lot of those athletes have been from gymnastics. Some haven't been. We even have people that are not from the world of sport on the podcast. They're incredibly generous with their time, and me and Sam are incredibly grateful every single time somebody makes the effort to journey to where we are and where the studio is based, to come and give us their time and share their story. It's something that we never take for granted. But booking guests is tough, and that's a challenge. And there's a young gymnast out there at the moment that's doing a really good job. So he's doing a gymnastics podcast, and he's maybe having the conversations with the athletes that I'm not, that are around his age. They're quite young. Some of them are under the age of 18, some of them are around the age of 18. He's doing a great job. His name is Winston, so certainly check out his podcast if you can, if you're into gymnastics and you like this one. I've appeared on his podcast to share my story there, but he asked me, how do you go about booking guests and getting them to say yes? And I said, well, there's no easy answer to that, Winston. You kind of have to build that. I think you need that credibility, so you need to produce a good product, which I think me and Sam do, and I think hopefully the quality of the conversation is of a standard that a guest would want to appear on the show, because they're going to come on and maybe get asked questions they haven't been asked before, and it's going to push them a little bit to explore new ideas. And I think the other thing that's really important is that it's going to take some time. It's going to take some time until you get some yeses, and you're probably going to get a lot of no's. I get a lot of no's. I get fewer no's now than I did in the beginning. And you have to build that up, right? And you probably can't go for the biggest name in your, whatever it is, whatever sport you're doing or the area that you're focusing on in your podcast potentially. you're not going to get the biggest guest to say yes straight away. But, what's evident is now we've just released episode 100 last week with one of my childhood heroes, one of the biggest names in the sport of gymnastics, Fabian Hambuchen. But maybe if I asked him to come on the podcast back at episode 21, he wouldn't necessarily have said yes because, I hadn't built up that credibility yet. And I have to say, Sam does an incredible job behind the camera lens, in the studio and editing and producing the podcast, and we've got a great relationship, and we're a great team, and we work really well together. And I think it's credit to the podcast that we produce, both the audio and also the visuals of the podcast, that now we're at a point 100 episodes in that guests typically are more open to coming onto the show and saying yes, and they're going out of their way to find the time. But that's taken a lot of time. It's like I said, you're going to get a lot of no's before you get yeses. But I think that's the same in everything, And the other thing I would say is that most people are willing to help you. And most people want to share their story. So there have certainly been two of the challenges. And I think the last one is obviously financing the podcast. This is not an easy thing to do. And without Sam, one thing I think that we notice very quickly is that I have a unique set of skills and Sam has a unique set of skills. And together, we make a very, very good team. And if you were to go and do this by yourself, it would be very difficult. It would be very expensive. And you don't necessarily need to have all of the equipment to make a beautiful sounding podcast or a beautiful looking podcast. But I think it does make a big difference. And we put a lot of effort into the quality and what's produced on the other end. And hopefully people can see that. I think they can. And I think they like that. I think they like coming to see something that's beautiful and also listen to something that sounds incredibly crisp. And I think that makes a big, big difference. And I think something that Sam taught me very early on is that if it is predominantly a podcast, it's what it sounds like that's the most important. And for me, my job is to make sure the quality of the content of a conversation is really good. And I think if you match those two things together, you're onto a winning formula. And I think that's what's helped us get to episode 100. But what we did do quite early on was get some supporters on board and some sponsors. So this wouldn't have been possible to get to episode 100 without our sponsors, which are Turn Gymnastics. I knew Dave Eaton from back when he was a gymnast. When I first got into the GB team, he was one of the senior guys. He used to do beautiful gymnastics. Incredibly nice guy, and towards the end of my career he supported me. Turner are a gymnastics clothing brand. They focus solely on men's gymnastics. They have a branch now for women's gymnastics and they're moving into that, but predominantly they were created with the idea of making men's gymnastics clothing, leotards, handguards, all of that stuff specifically for men. And they're the only brand that do that, and the first brand to do that. And to work with Dave was incredible throughout my career, and he made some of the designs of the leotards. You might have seen them. We had one designed on the Man United kit, Forest kit, with the Nottingham Robin Hood. It was really cool, and I loved it. And the most important thing was that I believe in the products. They were my favorite leotards to wear, incredibly comfortable, and a lot of time and effort goes into that. I know that because I've worked with Dave on that creative process. And I think he has great relationships with the athletes that he works with too. And then the other brand that supported us is Gymnastic Planet. Yuri at Gymnastics Planet, another brilliant guy, big company within the UK. He's providing handguards to a lot of the great gymnasts in Great Britain, the best gymnasts, and when they're in a situation and they're stuck and their handguards have maybe broken and they need one really fast, I know he does an amazing job of getting them to the gymnasts as quick as possible so that they can train, compete, win medals for this country. Working with Yuri's been brilliant. He's done a great job recently of designing a pair of handguards for me personally, based on the handguards that Sergey made me throughout my career, which I've really enjoyed getting to use. I think they're brilliant. I think they're a great product and something that, I'm hoping that can maybe come to the masses one day, and it's something that I want to support. But he's been brilliant at supporting the podcast, and they believe in what we're doing. I believe in what they're doing, and I think it lines up great with the podcast. And their support and the sponsorship of these episodes has meant that me and Sam have been able to do this for 100 episodes, and it's very rare that a podcast makes it to this point. You can go online and have a look at the numbers. Not many podcasts ever get past episode 10, and hardly any get to episode 100. So that's something that we are both very, very proud of. I think in terms of development of the podcast, personally, one thing that I had to work on very quickly was my interviewing style. I don't know whether it's because of my ADHD, but I tended to talk over guests a lot and interrupt, and it's something that I still do. And I get great feedback from people that listen to the podcast, and some of it, I take it on board. And a great place, if you ever want to leave feedback, is on YouTube, because it's easier for me to go through and read the comments there, and I always get back to everybody. Sometimes it's a week or 2 weeks later, but I like to read the comments and see what people are thinking to the episodes, and maybe they give me some feedback, some advice, maybe other guests I could get on, ask me some questions. And I got a great piece of feedback recently, and it was that, Sam, don't ask too many questions in the question you're answering, because the guests can't keep up, and that happens a lot. Sometimes it'll be a loaded question with like 2 or 3 questions in one, so I'm trying to dial that down a little bit so I don't confuse the guest, because you'll quite often hear in some of the episodes the guests go, and what was the second part of that question? So, I'm always learning. I'm always trying to get better, and I love that. I love it's not a finished product. I hope that we've done 100. I like to do another 100, and maybe one day get to 5 and 1,000. Just keep going, and it's just a never-ending journey that I'm on. This is something that I'm in for the long run. So working on my interviewing technique and how I approach certain conversations, difficult questions, potentially guests as well. You never really know what a guest is going to be like until they sit in front of you, especially if it's a guest that maybe I don't know personally, and maybe I don't have as much in-depth knowledge of their story. It's my job to try and bring that out of them, and maybe if they're a little bit nervous or quieter or a bit more shy, I have to talk a little bit more and work a bit harder to dig deeper. Maybe if it's a guest that's brilliant and they're very used to public speaking and telling their story, I can just ask one question and then let them fly. So yeah, interviewing technique is something that I've worked on throughout. Social media has been a big one. I've been quite vocal of not being the biggest fan of social media, but I see it differently now, and I see it as a tool, and I use it for my business to build and its promotion for the podcast, but all the work that I do as well. I do lots of work in schools, do lots of gymnastics coaching, public speaking events, and the podcast. And for me, using social media is very, very important to spread that message. And I think that comes line in line with self-promotion, which is something I've had to work on. I'm not very good at promoting myself. I'm much better now, but in the past, I would be very insecure about what people would think about me. I think this goes back to being a 14, 15-year-old. Most teenagers are very insecure, and for me, having big sponsors plastered all over my parents' car, it's something that I didn't like the attention. I didn't want people to think of me as different. I just wanted to be the same as everybody else. I didn't want to stand out. I just wanted people to treat me the same, and I think that carried on throughout my teenage years into my early 20s, particularly competing at the highest level, maybe being at Olympic Games and on TV. It's a very intimidating environment to be in, and you're constantly questioning what people's motives are, and you can become a little bit cynical potentially and question why people are asking you to do things. And the TV world is a very strange world, and once you've been in it and you see how that works, it makes it very hard to watch TV programs, or certainly reality TV programs after that, because that nearly every part of that is set up in some way and fabricated. So for me, social media is something that I've had to learn to use and how to use it. And now I see it very much, like I said, as a business tool, and there's systems to it. And I enjoy it. I enjoy exploring, how does the algorithm work? How can we do a better job of producing content that people want to watch? And I think social media is a great way to learn things. I think you have to strike that balance, and I certainly try and strike that balance by separating my social media in terms of the business tool and then personally. And it's a constant battle, right? I'm constantly trying to spend less time on my phone, and when I'm with my family, particularly when I'm with Aussie now, try and not be on my phone as much and just use it for business and not go on it in family times, just use it in the working day. But it's a constant battle. I think that's the same for everybody. But those two things, and I think the big step for me towards that was, we had conversations in the beginning, me and Sam, when we were starting the podcast, but I think naming the podcast the Sam Oldham Podcast was a big step towards being comfortable with, maybe who I am, but also promoting my story. And the story I've got to share, and I'm really glad that I did that. It's something that I never did in the past. If you follow me on social media, you'll see that my handles on Instagram might be Oldham93, or on Twitter I think it's the same thing. It's not Sam Oldham, because again, I think there was that insecurity and worrying about what other people thought and wanting to almost hide in some way. But now I'm really proud of who I am, what I represent, and what I'm trying to do. And yeah, I'm really glad that I went with that. I think that was a big step for me personally. And I think it's given me so many gifts, this podcast. The opportunity to reconnect with my old teammates has been something that I've loved. It's been massive, particularly I think to Christian and Lewis, when they came down, we spent 2 or 3 hours together chatting, catching up on life. I mean, that's just been so brilliant for me personally. I spend a lot of time by myself, so to have those opportunities to chat with people that have been through what I've been through and find out what's going on in their life, and we've stayed in touch. And I try to do that with a lot of the guests that come on, and the great thing is that some of my old teammates have now reconnected through the podcast and me kind of steering them to each other and saying, you should chat to this guy because his story is similar to you and he lives near you now. And I think that's been a beautiful thing that's come from the podcast. And I think all of us guys, in many ways, felt very isolated on our own to deal with, maybe our experiences and what we'd been through. But actually, we've got so much in common, and coming together and sharing them has helped all of us, I think, in some way kind of heal and really process what happened and be able to move on and understand that there were some difficult things that maybe happened in your career, but actually gymnastics brought us so much. And those memories and those experiences we had together, I think, are memories that we're going to cherish for the rest of our lives. So yeah, that's been a real gift for me, reconnecting with old teammates. I think the teamwork with Sam is something that I've really enjoyed, like working together with somebody else on a project. And we recently did that episode with Sergey, and Sergey used to say, you can go fast by yourself, but you can go twice as far when you work as a team. And I think for me, I've really enjoyed having something to work on that we're both really proud of. We're both bringing different skills to the table. And I think we both really respect what each other is bringing to the table and to the podcast. And I get so excited every week when I open the WeTransfer file to see the imagery for the podcast and the clips. Like, I love it. And hopefully Sam enjoys, I'm sure at times he gets bored, but hopefully at times Sam enjoys sitting there and listening to the guests. And Sam said quite before, he's the first person that gets to listen to these conversations, and it's, hopefully he feels like it's a privileged position to be in, to sit and listen to some of these incredible guest stories and hear them with no noise and just kind of forget everything outside for an hour and a half every week. Yeah, I imagine that I would enjoy that as well. So I think we both got a lot from this, but working as a team is something that I've taken forward into other areas of my life. I can fall into the trap of spending a lot of time by myself, particularly because I work for myself. And actually what I'm trying to do now is in every area of my work, so whether it be the podcast with Sam, coaching with a young gymnast called Liam, who supports me and helps me sometimes now when I have to be away, and he helps me coach there, and he's been incredible and something that's really valuable, and I enjoy that. Feeling like I'm not doing this just on my own. And then in the schoolwork, having Connie's brother now helps me with the admin side of things. And again, what I learned from Sam is that, I'm great at this bit. Sitting in front of the camera, sharing the stories, doing the interviewing and communicating. Sam's brilliant behind the camera, so you don't always have to do everything. I believe I could be great at almost everything, but not everything all at once. And pulling in someone like Connie's brother, who's really good at the written word and emailing and doing that, takes the pressure off me so I can focus on the other things. So working as a team is something that I knew, obviously, but I'm really, I've taken that on board from working with Sam, and it's a lesson that he's taught me, I think, which is really valuable for me and something I'm going to take with me for the rest of my life. I think the other thing is the freedom. I can talk about what I want with any guest that is willing to come on the podcast, and nobody is telling me what to say or what not to say. And I think as a credit to the sponsors as well, we've never had a conversation where they'd ask me not to talk about something or to say something, and I think that's what this podcast is all about. And I think people that come in here and we have a chat, they feel comfortable enough to be very honest and raw and share their feelings and their thoughts. And yeah, there's been some difficult conversations that have taken place on this podcast from me personally, but also guests. And I'm glad that we create that safe space and they feel that they can share that story, because I don't think there's many platforms out there for a lot of these incredible athletes and incredible gymnasts to be able to do that. And so I think that freedom of being in control of your own narrative is something that I massively value, and it's something that I'm not going to give away lightly in the future, and I'm always going to be thinking about. So yeah, that's been brilliant for me, and I think that's something that I will remember for the rest of my life and probably share that advice with others in the future. I'm going to move on to some of the stories that really stuck out for me when listening to the guests. I've picked out 3 today, and I think the first one, I love storytelling, and I've got a great imagination. I was telling a group of kids in the school that I was in last week that I wasn't very good at reading and writing when I was younger because my concentration with my ADHD wasn't great. But one thing that I found that I loved doing was poetry, which was really strange. When I was in year 4, I remember writing this poem, and my teacher couldn't believe it because I really didn't pay much attention to English, but poetry, because I could see it and visualize it, and it was, for me, it like painted this picture in my head. I still remember the line today. It was big bulky bushes bursting like volcanoes, and there was this bush outside our classroom at school in year 4 at Crossdale Drive Primary School, where I went to school. I'm actually going back into that school to do a workshop in February, which will be cool. And there was this big like thornbury bush outside, and it was like winter time, and it just looked all kind of scary and dark. And I saw that and I visualized it, and I just love storytelling so much, and imagery and visualizing, being able to see things in my head. And I think when Lewis came on the podcast and he told that story about being at the Olympic Games in London, having 20,000 people there, knowing that this is your biggest moment of your life, you've got 10 sponsors in the executive boxes watching, your family and friends are there, and it's all led to this moment and this one routine, 60 seconds on the pommel horse. And you can hear all the cameras clicking, and everybody behind the cameras and all the journalists. And you do all that work so that in that moment when you put your hand up, you're able to press the autopilot button. I think for me, that just created the most incredible image in my head, and it took me back there. And I was there, I was sat in the crowd with the rest of our teammates watching that performance, and I remember it like it was yesterday. And for him, to just share that story, it was just it was very powerful. I think there was some incredible messaging in there, but some amazing storytelling. And for me, that was one of the best stories that I remember listening to. And I think through the whole of him telling that story, I was smiling because he took me to that place, which was brilliant. And I think that's what great storytellers do. I think the other one was Frank Baines' story. And the reason that I picked this one out is that it made me very emotional. Frank took us on this journey of this career and injuries and setbacks and challenges. And Frank was someone that I think suffered from that system and that culture of fear that certainly existed at that time. And when he told the story of being at the World Championships, being the reserve again, wanting his opportunity, choosing to go to the training gym with one of his teammates to support him, and the coach there on that day saying, "Why did we even bring you? We should have brought someone else." I think that that was like an expression of the feeling that a lot of my generation have inside of us. It was that constant negative feedback being broken down. And eventually, there's only so much of that you can take. And I think as a coach or as any person that works with young people, you're in such a privileged position of being able to have such a positive impact on a young person's life. And words are really powerful, and how you choose to motivate someone is really, really important. And I think for me, it upset me, and it made me very frustrated and angry, but it provoked that emotion. It was great storytelling again. And, for me and Sam have sat here and we've listened to all of these stories, and I think that represented a lot of the feeling and the emotion you get from listening to these conversations. And it was an incredible story that Frank told. And I hope it's one that certainly people resonated with. It got a lot of views online, particularly on Instagram. It did really well, that clip that we had of that episode. And I think because people could resonate with it. And I think because Frank's such an amazing guy, right? He's one of my best friends, incredible human being, incredible gymnast. And that really struck a chord with a lot of people. So, and again, another example of someone that came on and was willing to be incredibly honest and vulnerable and share that story. And I think that's going to help a lot of people. And I think that story did, and it resonated with a lot of people. It certainly did with me. And I think that's what this podcast is all about. So that was another brilliant moment that stuck out. And I think the other one is, I think Ellie Downey's story. My experience was of a male gymnast. But to have female gymnasts on the podcast is something that I love to do. It's certainly difficult. I think there's that element of trust that certainly exists within the women's side of the sport of gymnastics. That trust was broken on the men's side for sure, but I think there's even more fractured on the women's side. And for Ellie to be brave enough to come on and share her story, it was an incredible story that she told. And again, a gut-wrenching one, a heart-wrenching one at times, but to see how well Ellie's doing now and what she's gone on to after she retired from her sport and the success that she's having. And that's another thing that I've loved doing. It's following everybody's journey after they've been on the podcast and feeling like I'm part of it and I'm on board, and I love that. It's brilliant. And Ellie shared the story of that culture and what it was like. And she just said it was just pressure. There was no fun, no enjoyment. That's how it felt the whole time. And actually, you're constantly walking on this tightrope, I think, as an athlete of, it's very easy to fall into the trap of having some success after you put in a lot of hard work and sacrifice. And maybe there's some pain and struggle and suffering that goes along with that. But what can end up happening is that you can associate the pain, the struggle, the sacrifice with the success. And before you know it, you start to believe that the more pain, the more struggle, the more sacrifice, the more success, the bigger the success. And that is just not sustainable. And eventually what happens, you end up breaking down and that all goes wrong. And I think, for me, that's one thing that I think was quite common within my career and the athletes that I trained with, worked with, and teammates. Before you know it, you can quite quickly fall into this trap of almost self-harm and feeling like, well, I'm going to have to be in pain. I'm going to have to suffer. I'm going to have to struggle in order to feel this happiness at the end of winning this medal and it all being worthwhile. And I've certainly learned that that isn't the case. And actually, what comes after that is a bigger depression on the other side. And what you have to do is trying to learn to love the process of what it is that you're doing. And that's what I took away from Ellie's story. And I think that, hopefully through sharing 48 of these athletes' stories, it is helping in some way, shape or form from the outside to nudge the sport in a certain direction. And the incredible thing is that through sitting down with athletes from other sports, it's the same story. It's not just unique to gymnastics. This exists in the world of sport. And I think because sport, in a sense, is about medals and performances, I'm not necessarily sure this is ever going to go away, but we've got to do our best to try and change that mindset a little bit and think about what happens to those athletes when they retire and when they walk away and they go on to the next chapter of their lives and the impact they're going to have on the people around them moving forward. So I think they were the big stories. And then the last thing I'm definitely going to talk about is the viral moment that we had. So this was the first time I was ever tested in terms of what I would say in my theory around not caring what people thought and getting to that place. It's all right saying that when you maybe have 10 or 20 people comment on a video, but when you get 1 million views overnight and there's 2,500 athletes telling me that I haven't got a clue what I'm talking about, that really tested my resolve. And I certainly did go and have a look at those comments, but what I did do was screenshot all of the professional athletes that commented on that because I thought this would be great to have them come on the podcast one day, or maybe we could do something here because it's obviously sparked some kind of conversation. Now, we're a year on from that, maybe 18 months on from that viral moment where I told everybody that I think if you took the Olympic champion in gymnastics and you got them to compete against the Olympic champion in every other sport, the gymnast would be able to do all of the other sports, but the other sports would struggle to do the gymnastics, the fundamentals of the sports. I got a lot of hate for that online. What's really cool is that, that certainly made me go back and reflect. But 18 months later, I still feel that gymnastics is the best base sport to start from. When I go into schools, I tell everybody, right, kids, before we do our gymnastics, we've got to do a warm-up. Because when you do gymnastics, you use everything from the top of your head to the tips of your toes. And it's true. You use every muscle group, every part of your body. Every apparatus you use in different parts of the human body. Whether you're hanging on the high bar, whether you're in support on the pommel horse, whether you're using that explosive power on floor and vault, whether you're on the technical apparatus like the parallel bars, whether you need that strength, that superhuman strength on the rings, you've got to master the whole human body. And I think that gives kids, when they start gymnastics, a huge advantage if they go into other sports. And so I think you do your child, or whether it's a young boy or a young girl, as a parent, you're doing them, or even as a school, making sure you're teaching gymnastics, you're doing those kids a real service as they get older and they explore different sports. Because when I look back to when I did football as a kid, or athletics or rugby, I was a very small kid, but I was very strong, and that helped me that helped me adapt and evolve quickly to different sports and trying new things. And in particular, my spatial awareness, knowing where I am in space and time, it still helps me to this day. And I've started exploring different sports now, and I took some of that feedback. And one of the common sports that people came back with were wrestlers. Wrestlers can do handstand, they can do all of that, and they're the toughest. And I did a wrestling session, and I can concur that wrestling is incredibly tough. It was way too violent for me. I did one session, I didn't do another one. I'm sticking to jiu-jitsu, but my gymnastics certainly helps me with my jiu-jitsu and knowing where I am in space and time and that skill learning process. And now I go back to football, and again, that spatial awareness and that flexibility, dexterity with both feet, all of that is massively helpful. And I still stick to my my guns, and I do think that gymnastics is the most difficult sport in the Olympic Games. The most technical, there's the most to learn, and it requires the most amount of time to master that sport over the course of a career. You've got kids in gymnastics starting at the age of 5, training sometimes upwards of 30 hours a week by the age of 8, 9 years old, and they've got to time their career so they're just ready to do 6 routines at an Olympic Games at that one moment. Oh, what an incredibly difficult thing to do. So for me, I'm always going to support the gymnasts and big my sport up. But I certainly learned a lot from that, and it made me reflect. But it was a great test of whether or not I was going to be able to not read too much into the feedback, not be swayed too much by other people's opinions, maybe change what I'm doing, and I certainly didn't. And an interesting thing that happened after that was a couple of people had come on the podcast who very prominent online figures and are really good at, I guess, the social media game and on the YouTube space, and they said, you should use that. You should kind of milk that a little bit, and it's just not me. I think that went viral completely authentically. I didn't try to make it do that. It was a brilliant piece of content, a really interesting talking topic, and that's why it did so well. And yeah, it's something that maybe will happen again in the future, and hopefully we can take that idea and run with it a little bit. I would love to go to some of those athletes that strongly disagreed with me and maybe train with them and try their sports out. It's something I've thought about, me and Sam have thought about. Maybe in the future we'll be able to do that. But I think that big viral moment is something that I learned a lot from. I think some of the learning from the guests is a big one, and I think the most common trait that I've noticed with the athletes that have come on the podcast, and they've been very successful, and they all have, I think the biggest difference for me between the good and the great is the self-confidence. And it almost is like on the edge of being arrogant and cocky and delusional, but I think you have to have it. I think you have to have that self-confidence because you're going to face so many obstacles and you're going to be knocked back, and there's going to be people that say you can't do it along the way. You have to have that unwavering self-belief. And I think the athletes that are able to hold on to that and hold it tight to their chest and believe in themselves are the ones that are going to find what they need to in those difficult moments to keep going and not give up. I think quite often in the end, the people that make it to the top and achieve the goals they set out to do are the ones that hang on for long enough, and you're going to need that self-confidence to do that. I think you only get that self-confidence through evidence, and I think that's backed up by work. And I think the one thing that I've realized on this podcast is you can be the most talented gymnast in the world, the most talented athlete in the world, but even those ones that potentially people from the outside would look and say, he's just super talented, when we listen to their stories, actually you find out that no, they worked the hardest. And that's one thing that, I've really taken away. You do need talent. You need some natural gifts. You have to have them. But that has to match up with the hard work. And if you don't have the two, those athletes never seem to make it to the top or carry on long enough. And I think that's the common trait between all of the top athletes that we've had on the podcast is that that self-confidence, that self-belief. And I think that's something that you build through years and years of training and confidence in your work. And, maybe it's a personality trait in terms of those athletes seem to be people that like to perform. They're kind of performers. They turn it on when the bright lights are on. I think you can train that. I think you can learn that. But I think some people do have that naturally within them. But it's definitely that self-confidence, I think, for me. I think energy is a big one that me and Sam have picked up on. Whether we're sat in front of somebody that is an active gymnast, an active athlete, still in the middle of their career, or we're sat with someone that's retired, we get a very different conversation. And it'd be interesting to know from the viewers and the listeners whether you feel that too, through your headphones or watching on YouTube. whether or not you feel that there's a different energy from athletes that are still competing in their career. I think you certainly get a bit of more of an edginess from people that are still competing, maybe a bit more reserved with the answers that they give. And I think that makes so much sense, right? Because they're still trying to figure things out. They're still very much, it's almost like that those nerves and those jitters you get before you're competing, I think it's that on-edgeness that you get when people are still athletes and they're still trying to compete at the highest level. And I think you need that too. You need that edge, that competitiveness, that ruthlessness has to be there. But I think once you're retired, you're able to be a bit more reflective, open and honest about your career. You've probably done a little bit of reminiscing as well. You've probably looked at those big moments and chapters in your sporting career and reflected on them and taken what you need from them. And I think you get maybe more of a relaxed conversation, open conversation. And I enjoy both of those. There's not one that I enjoy more than the other. And I think it's really interesting chatting to athletes that are still in the middle of that. They're still competing at the highest level. I love that. I miss it. I miss being that athlete, that's still there, chomping at the bit, ready to go all the time, wanting more, striving for that. And I think you need that. What's next? I think maybe if you had that mentality of a retired athlete of sitting back and appreciating what you achieved, you're probably not going to have that success. So that's been a big thing. And I think the last thing, and this is one big takeaway that, Sam certainly brought up quite early on when we started interviewing guests, is that it's the same story again and again. It's that story, that culture. It's just the same story told for a different athlete's experience, and whether they're from men's gymnastics, women's gymnastics, whether they're gymnasts from around the world, whether they're from France, America, Australia, it's the same story again and again. And I think actually in life, you're just going to face challenges and setbacks, but you need to figure out a way to get through those, to manage those, and learn to appreciate the little things, the process, and to find something that you're willing to sacrifice your time, your effort, and struggle and work hard for, that the positives of what you're doing and the rewards at the end of it are worth the sacrifice. And I think everybody that I've spoke to, when you ask them the question, would you do it all over again? They say yes. So for me, that's evidence that it was worthwhile. And the journey was worthwhile, and what they've learned about themselves and life and what they've achieved, the experiences they've had and the memories they've got from their careers were worth all of the injuries, the challenges, the setbacks, the mental knocks, whatever they faced throughout, they were all worth it. So that's certainly something that I've learned, that it's the same story again. And hopefully that's why people relate to the podcast so much. And whether you're interested in sports, whether you're just a fan, whether you're an athlete yourself, hopefully you can resonate with at least some of what the guests are saying and they're experiencing, and it's relatable. And I think that's why we've been able to get to episode 100. And yeah, it's been brilliant. And I must say a massive thank you to all of the guests again that have given us their time. They've all been incredibly generous. None more so than my childhood hero, Fabian Hambuchen. We recently had the pleasure of traveling out to Germany to spend time with Fabian and his dad. If you've not listened to the episode with Fabian's dad, who was his coach throughout his career, it's an incredible episode. It's an amazing interview taken from a documentary that's going to be coming out in the near future that was so good, we just had to share it as a podcast episode. And I think that tees up episode 100 that released this week with Fabian himself. And that people often say never meet your heroes, but that is not true. And meeting Fabian and spending time with him throughout my career and becoming friends with him and spending that time with him in Germany, he was incredibly welcoming. God, the time and the effort he put into making sure that me and Sam had everything that we needed. Picked us up from the train station, helped us with logistics, took us for a coffee, made sure that the gym and the setup was spot on. It was just incredible. And what an amazing guy. And, I go back to when I was around the age of 21, 22, I remember finishing the British Championships and not doing very well. I didn't perform very well. I was very embarrassed at my performance. And after you compete at the British Championships at the Echo Arena in Liverpool, you have the opportunity to go out the back gym, you walk up some stairs, and you come out into the foyer, and there's loads of kids that wait there for photos and autographs. And at that time in my life, I was very insecure, about myself. I didn't have a good relationship with myself, and I was so embarrassed of my poor performance, and I was so scared that I'd walk out that door into that group of kids and no one would ask for my autograph or photo, and that'd be so embarrassing for people to see that, and they'd all be thinking, look, nobody wants his autograph, that I chose to escape out the back exit where the loading bay is and just run off, basically. And that's something that now I look back on and I'm not ashamed of, because the reasons for that were that I was just really, really scared of, essentially looking silly. I was a gymnast, and when I competed at the British Championships, they always used to announce Sam Oldham, London 2012, Olympic bronze medalist. And as the years would go on, that never changed. My biggest achievement in my career was always the Olympic Games in London. And once I got to 2018, 2019, and 7 years down the line, they were still introducing me at the British Championships as Sam Oldham, the London 2012 Olympic bronze medalist, my heart would drop, because I'd think, have I not done anything else in my career in 7 years? God, everybody must be thinking, wow, they're still saying that. He hasn't done anything since that moment. So that was an insecurity in me that I had to learn to go after. And now, whenever I get the chance, if ever there's somebody that wants a photo, that wants an autograph, I give them as much of my time as I possibly can. When I go into schools, I try and leave autographs with every classroom so that every kid can have one, because you never know who you're going to inspire. And for the first time, last week on Friday, I went into a school. It was Hemmingborough Community Primary School in Lincolnshire. And I had gone into that school 18 months ago, and a little boy came up to me and he said, Sam, I've wrote you a letter. And he said, when you came into my school 18 months ago, you inspired me to take up gymnastics, and I've been doing it for 18 months and I love it. It's my favorite thing to do in the world. And I was like, that's why. You never know who it is you're going to inspire. So any young gymnast out there that maybe have had a situation where they've had a bad competition and they've performed poorly and they're worried about maybe somebody not asking them, it doesn't matter. It's not about that. It's about that kid that you could inspire, that was you one day. You would have sat there once, I would have, if I was at a competition and I'd seen Fabian Hambuchen perform, my childhood hero, and he had a bad competition, and I was stood there with my autograph book waiting for him. It didn't matter to me whether he fell off or not. I just wanted to meet him because I thought he was incredible. And so that's a great lesson that I learned, and it's a real example with Fabian. It doesn't matter how good you are. He was one of the greatest of all time in gymnastics. He had so much time for everybody that he meets, and what a legend. And yeah, thank you to Fabian. And if you've not listened to that conversation, please go and listen to it or watch it on YouTube, because we filmed that in Fabian and his dad's amazing childhood gym, which was just a beautiful gym. It was really, really cool. So yeah, I would recommend that you go ahead and you watch that episode. But they were the big takeaways for me. And it's been amazing to sit in front of 48 different guests and listen to their stories. And, like Sam, I have that opportunity to listen to them first. And all I've ever tried to do is ask the questions that I'm interested in. Hopefully other people are interested too. I still today forget that people listen to the podcast. We go into a room every week, me and Sam, we record it. It gets put out there into the ether. And when the people that listen and support the show, they engage with it and they send me a message, I always see it. Might take me a bit of time because I'm very busy and I have to run all of my businesses and be a dad and do all of that, but I see every single message, and we really appreciate all of the support, all of the feedback, the advice. I try to take it on board. I listen to who people want to get on and the guests, and we really appreciate everybody that's come along on this journey. And without you guys listening, downloading, supporting, watching, we wouldn't have been able to go to the sponsors and say, hey, it's working. This thing we're doing, it's actually working. And we've made it to episode 100. So thank you to everybody that's ever listened to the podcast, ever watched it. To everybody that subscribes. If you're not subscribing, please do that. It's 100 episodes now that we've released, and there are lots of people that find us and go back and start from episode 1 and go all the way through. And hopefully you almost can listen to my story as I go along through my life, and I want to share it and continue to do so. And it's, it's like an audio book, this podcast. It's 100 chapters of my story, and I love doing it. We're going to continue to do it. It's great for me. It acts as a megaphone for all the other work that I do. And I think, without you guys that are listening, we wouldn't be able to do this. So we're going to continue to do our very best to bring you incredible conversations with incredible athletes. And that's the main goal. It's to share those stories with those athletes that maybe don't have the opportunity to do that. And we want to be that platform that does that and bring those stories to life. I think the other thing that I'm going to finish with is that, as we go into the new year in 2025, I've got some big plans. I'm super excited. It's been 2 years of working for myself. It's working. I love my life. It's been an incredible journey becoming a dad. I can't believe Ozzy is going to be a year old next month. I know it's a cliche and every parent says it goes so fast, but that frightens me. 1 year, I feel the same about the podcast. I can't believe we've done this for 2 years. It feels like 1 year. It's still to me in my head, we started last January, but it's been 2 years of the podcast, which it is an amazing achievement. It's something we're both incredibly proud of. To do 100 episodes of a podcast every week, it's not easy. We have to do it come rain or shine, whether we feel ill, we feel under the weather, we're tired. We make sure that we turn up and we do our very best for the people that support the show and listen to the podcast. And that's an achievement I'm proud of. And I'll remember for the rest of my life, whatever work that I do and continue to do in the future, I'll remember the commitment and the work and the sacrifice and the hard work that we both put in and how rewarding that was. Every time we release an episode and we see that great feedback, it's something that's very special. Me and Sam have created, and massive thank you to Sam. I'm the guy that sits in front of the camera and is the face of this, but without Sam, this just would not be possible. So I'm sure he feels very awkward sitting there, but a massive thank you to him. And if there is anybody out there that's an athlete like me and is potentially interested in somebody coming in to their gym, their environment, documenting their journey, maybe taking the incredible portraits that you get to see for the podcast, reach out to Sam Linley. He has a website and he is brilliant at what he does. And he is, I'm obviously biased, but I think he's the best at what he does. And I hope that our relationship will continue for a long time into the future. But thank you to everybody. If there is anyone out there that's potentially interested in a club gymnastics coaching visit or a school visit going into the summer, I'm now starting to book those events in and I'm getting very busy. January has been a quiet month for me the last 2 years, just starting out. But this month I've already done 6 schools. Looks like I've got 5 or 6 schools in February, so I'm starting to get super busy. So club visits for the summer and also school visits, now's the time to get them booked in with me. So if you want to book us a visit or a public speaking event, samoldhamgymnastics.com, go there. But if you want to get straight to me directly for any school events or gymnastics events, it's samoldhamgymnastics@gmail.com. And of course, you can message me on social media, but you can get to me pretty directly through my email. But thank you very much to everybody that supported us over 100 episodes. It's an amazing achievement. I can't wait for the next 100. I know we've got some cool guests that have said yes at the start of the year, and we're going to do some exciting things. We're going to continue to bring you very different stories, not just big, massive guests, but also unique perspectives. That's something that I want to do and start to explore the visual side of the process in creating our own documentaries. We've got our first documentary on the way, end of this month, so look out for that. It's going to be really, really cool, something a little bit different. But thank you to everyone that supported us for 100 episodes. Thank you to Sam, thank you to the sponsors, Turn and Gymnastic Planet. And here's to the next 100 episode.